Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Markiplier theory, and in this video we will be taking a look back at the timeline, because the timeline of the Markiplier lore is something that I haven't really talked about in a while, and I feel like we just kind of need to revisit it again, just to kind of make it more clear kind of what we know so far, or what we theorize about so far in terms of the Markiplier lore. Now I can already tell this video is going to get a bit controversial because the timeline, that's a big topic, that's a big subject in the Markiplier lore. It's pretty confusing and still to this day not fully 100% solved. It seems like the community can't really come to like a good conclusion on what we think it is. However, I do have an idea on what the timeline is that I've expressed in many past theories that I'm pretty much just going to be going over today, kind of a bit of a refresher. So yeah, let's get into it. So actually, if you go to my channel and you go to the playlists I've made, you'll see one just titled Markiplier, and there is where I try to keep all the videos canon to the Markiplier lore that I know about in order of where they go in the timeline. Now, of course, there's a couple exceptions in there, like the In Space with Markipliers. There isn't really a good spot to fit those, which I'll explain more about later. And there's also a few other videos that don't go specifically before or after other videos, but they just kind of needed to be in a certain spot, and that seemed like a good enough spot for their inclusion to make sense in the lore. Take, for instance, the King of Squirrels being right after Wilford mother-loving Warfstash. I don't actually think that the King of Squirrels takes place right after Wilford Warfstash. It's just I know that they most likely take place around the same point in time before Markiplier TV. That's the only sort of limit or variable at play when discussing the King of Squirrels video and where it should go in the timeline. So that was just a good spot to put it compared to where everything else is. That doesn't mean that I necessarily think that it goes there specifically, but I think it's probably best there for now in terms of where everything else is going in the Markiplier lore. Anyways, hopefully that's not too confusing. Now let's get into actually going through each video. And of course, in the Markiplier timeline, the video that kicks off everything else is the series known as Who Killed Markiplier. But there's even still quite a bit of lore that takes place before Who Killed Markiplier. Before Who Killed Markiplier, apparently Damien, Actor Mark, and the Colonel were all friends. Celine, also known as Damien's sister, ends up falling in love with Actor Mark, but then the Colonel steals Celine from him, and then Actor Mark gets mad, tries to plot revenge, also known as attempting to murder all his friends and himself in Who Killed Markiplier. However, in terms of the timeline, in between every single Who Killed Markiplier chapter lies one of the Jim videos. You know the ones I'm talking about, the ones where Jim and cameraman Jim wander around the mansion of Who Killed Markiplier and try to find out what the heck is going on, and every video ended either zooming in on Jim's butt or crotch. In case you couldn't tell, very important to the lore. I mean, come on, what's the Markiplier lore without 1,000 Jims everywhere? But in all seriousness, after the 4 Markiplier chapters and the 4 Jim videos, next up in the timeline is the video known as Damien. This actually technically takes place during Who Killed Markiplier Chapter 4. It has been confirmed by Markiplier himself that during the scene whenever Darkiplier's picking up the cane and goes from the girl hand to the boy hand, that is when all the events of Damien happen in just that single second, all of it inside of Darkiplier's head. So technically Damien doesn't really come after the final chapter of Who Killed Markiplier. It more specifically happens near the end of the final chapter. So whenever creating the playlist, the best I could do was put Damien right after the events of Who Killed Markiplier. So now strap in, people, because this is when the timeline starts to get complicated, or I guess vague is a better word to describe it. I believe that next up in the timeline is Wilford mother-loving Warfstash. I know that there is lots of sayings and stuff throughout this video about how it's been years since their last encounter. It's been years since Abe and Wilford last had that shootout that happened at the end of Who Killed Markiplier. But also another thing Markiplier confirmed whenever he was doing one of those live streams where he explains a lot of stuff about the lore, he confirmed that they think in their brains that it's been a long time, but really, since like the world is kind of messed up and stuff, and due to like just the rules of the universe the Markiplier lore takes place in, actually not much time has passed at all. It like takes place right after the events of Who Killed Markiplier, even though it feels like years have passed. Another good theory about Wilford mother-loving Warfstash comes from Amazing Purple Girl. She says, in my headcanon, which is my fanfic, actor Mark absolutely did kill Celine and Damien, and not just by stealing bodies. Abe is only being kept alive by the house, keeping him in his own world, so again, he's definitely dead. If this is true, then this could mean that Wilford mother-loving Warfstash only takes place inside of Abe's head, which, considering everything that happens throughout that video, is a huge possibility. Shout out to Amazing Purple Girl for putting her own thoughts on the matter in the comments below, and if you guys have any thoughts or theories, make sure to also comment them down below, and I might feature them in a future Markiplier theory. Anyways, at this point in the timeline, we're about to get introduced to a lot more Markiplier egos. In no specific order, we are going to be starting to see videos about the King of Squirrels, Bim Trimmer, this one Redneck Child Seller, the Silver Shepherd, Silver Sheep, whatever you call him, and of course, Bing and Google. All these characters, including a few more, are going to be getting their own storylines. The Silver Shepherd's alter ego is having sex with his wife. That one redneck dude from earlier is having trouble finding somebody who wants to buy his own child. Google and Bing are at odds, and the worst news doctor is giving people the worst news. So now you might be wondering, while all this stuff is happening, what's going on with our beloved Wilford Warfstash? Well, he's currently having a fight with Slenderman. But besides that, he's also starting his own interviewing business where he gets to interview people. He ends up interviewing people like Markiplier and Freddy Fazbear, which has some pretty weird lore implications. Does this mean that the FNAF lore is connected to the Markiplier lore? Well, yes, but not in the way you think. Let me explain. I'm willing to bet that the more likely possibility is that this means that the random encounters FNAF musicals are what's canon in the Markiplier lore, because those videos alone already feature a night guard Markiplier, which could be another Markiplier ego that just adds on to our never-ending list of Markiplier variants. I'll end up looking more into the connection between Markiplier and FNAF in a future Markiplier theory, so make sure to stay tuned for that. So anyways, that's what Wilford is doing. What about Darkiplier? While Darkiplier spends most of his time just angry at actor Mark, there is one time where he ends up encountering Antisepticeye and they end up fighting pretty much. Now I know, just like with the FNAF connection earlier, this technically means that Jacksepticeye's lore is also canon and takes place in the same universe as the Markiplier lore, but I'm not even going to try to put any of the Jacksepticeye lore into this already filled up timeline, mainly because I don't know anything about the Jacksepticeye lore. But as we move on, eventually Wilford Warfstash gets the idea to start some sort of TV show thing, so he ends up calling up Darkiplier and all those other Markiplier egos that I talked about earlier, and Wilford pitches to them an idea for a TV show. The rest of the egos kind of had mixed thoughts about it, so it never really ended up going anywhere. Anyways, after the events of Markiplier TV, we know that Googleplier gets an upgrade and turns into 4 Googlepliers, each with a different colored shirt. And now we're getting to a heist with Markiplier, where Darkiplier ends up finding some blue crystal on the ground, and he ends up trying to use it to destroy actor Mark and you, the viewer. He actually ends up failing and tries to do it again in A Date with Markiplier, where he tries to sabotage you and actor Mark's date. And while Darkiplier is attempting to complete his story arc and get revenge on actor Mark, Wilford Warfstash is over here just building an animatronic of himself that can do interviews and kill people. And that is how far we've gotten on the Markiplier timeline. But wait, you might ask, where is In Space with Markiplier Part 1 and 2? Those were never in the timeline. That's because they take place in a whole other universe. In Space with Markiplier is essentially the origin story of the blue crystal and how it ended up in the Markiplier lore universe. So for that reason, I put In Space with Markiplier Part 1 and 2 before, like right before A Heist with Markiplier in the timeline. But that's because I didn't want to include them out of it or like not have them in it, even though it's not necessarily in the same timeline as the rest of the Markiplier lore. So technically there isn't really a good spot to put it in just one single playlist. So Behind A Heist with Markiplier is the best I could do. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below what y'all think the timeline is. If I got anything right or anything wrong, make sure to let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below, and I will love to read them and maybe even feature them in my next Markiplier theory. So yeah, that's gonna be it for this video. Bye bye.